Hello YouTube and welcome to my channel. So recently one of my viewers mentioned he made a new account, and that led me to think about making one myself, to see what the experience is like for new players in 2.0. This was an interesting experience. As I went through the story again, albeit a bit faster than before, and the grind of leveling up once again, of course. My account is at level 48 at the time of the recording, and I would say it's at mid-game right now. And I wanted to share some helpful tips for any new player that is contemplating joining the Astral Express, or pick up the game again after they stopped early before. Now, disclaimer, I am gonna assume that you have at least some basic knowledge about the Hoyoverse games, or even gacha games. If I have to cram information about how gacha games work, this video will be 2 hours pretty much. So I'm not gonna be discussing how the gacha system works or anything like that. It's gonna be mostly about tips and tricks for new players starting in 2.0, what things you're gonna get for free and what things to focus on, as well as recommendations for teams and what to farm. But you can always, of course, ask in the comments, or you can come by my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/isora. Wink wink, nudge nudge. But on that note, let's get to the video. So one thing I noticed is there is a bit of story to go through, but not as much as I remember. The main story bits that you have to go through to get to the later stages are the 3 finished regions and a part of the new region that got released in 2.0. Some of the story patches we had in previous patches are kind of like side stories, if you will. So I would say you'll have to do around 5 patches worth of story, which is alright. Personally, I would take my time and enjoy the story. That's more important to me. Honkai Star Rail has a really great story, but know if you do take your time, you might miss out on some current events rewards, which is not the end of the world if you ask me, so don't succumb to the FOMO, like I usually do. And the good thing is, they do have a system in the game that gives you access to farming most of the materials for your characters, even if those materials are in a world you haven't reached yet, so yeah, just take your time and enjoy the ride pretty much. But you can, of course, just speedrun the story. That's really up to you. Depends on what you enjoy. Now let's talk about what you get for free as a new player. When it comes to characters, you get a bunch of them through different means. You get the Trailblazer, which is your main character pretty much. You start with the Destruction Path, a version of your main character. Then you get Danhong on March 7th, which you'll get through just progressing the story. Once you finish A Moment of Peace in particular, which is the end of the first region, you get a Doctor Ratio in the mail for free. Now, disclaimer, he's only available until the end of 2.1, so if you're watching this in the future, well, hello first. And second, unfortunately you missed out on it, so yeah. You also get a Serval in the mail as well, with a bunch of other rewards. Then you get Asta from the first introduction to the gacha system. It is guaranteed to get Asta in your first bowl, so yeah, I would qualify her as a free character pretty much. And a bit later in the story, you finally get Natasha. In other modes, you get Herda, I think up to E4 from going through the simulated universe, QQ or Shinkwe early from Forgotten Hall, and then Yukong also from Forgotten Hall a bit later after you finish the 3rd region and do some Forgotten Hall content. And finally, I would say around mid-game, you get links from a Pure Fiction. And the reason why I say mid-game is because I'm nearly level 50 and I still don't have her. It will require you to have at least 2 teams to play Pure Fiction, and you have to finish the 2nd stage to get her, so it is a little bit later. And don't worry, we'll go through all these characters and which ones you should consider building, including the characters you might get from the standard banner. Now when it comes to light cones, you do get some free 4-star light cones, aka weapons in this game, through level up and story. I believe you get Quid Quo Pro, which is an abundance light cone. You do get 2 Seriousness of Breakfast, which is an erudition light cone. 1 or 2 We Are Wildfire, which is a preservation light cone. 1 River Flows in Spring, which is a hunt light cone. And 1 Destiny's Threads Forewoven way later, which is like in the current patch 2.0, which is a preservation light cone. I might have missed 1 or 2, but yeah, all of these are the free-to-play accessible light cones that you can get from the Forgotten Hall shop. which is pretty much the end game of this game. Out of these, I would say Seriousness of Breakfast is amazing. The other ones are serviceable. They're definitely better than most of the 3-star light cones you're gonna get for those particular paths. The only good 3-star light cone that I can think of is Meshing Cogs, which is the Harmony path light cone. You also get a bunch of other resources, of course. If you make it to 2.0, you do get up to 20 tickets that you can use on the featured banner. And through level up and going through the story, you'll get a bunch of tickets that would help you get at least 2 standard 5-star characters, 1 early in the starter banner after 50 pulls, which you get a 5-star guaranteed after 50 pulls, and 1, I would say, mid-game if you're unlucky like me. You could of course get lucky and get the second 5-star earlier. You get a bunch of J's for pulls, get a bunch of credits and other resources for your characters and light cones. I believe you also get around 30-ish fuels, considering of course you get 10 fuels as a gift in the mail from Sparkle. One thing you can do from the start is claim all of the redemption codes that are available. I'll put a link for the ones that are active at the time you're checking this video. Yeah, go for it. Like, nothing beats free resources. Speaking of resources, I would recommend, of course, trying to get the simulated universe unlocked as fast as possible. This mode gives you a bunch of resources weekly, and you want to start accumulating the Herda Shop resources as fast as possible for the Herda Shop light cones, which are some of the best free-to-play options. We also have Echo of War domains as weekly content. Those do get unlocked through going through the story, and some of them are linked to some side stories, as I mentioned earlier. But I wouldn't fret too much over it. You'll get the first Echo of War unlocked early on, so you can just farm that until you unlock the other ones. Also, by going through the story, you'll unlock more gear domains, some better than the others. We'll talk about those more once we start talking about which domains to farm, which are the highest value basically. But yeah, these are the things to keep in mind while progressing at the start. Now let's talk characters. Which are the characters to build? This kind of depends, of course, on where you are in the game and what content you're tackling. Disclaimer, of course, build whatever characters you want to build. It's up to you to have fun with the game, but if you're out of ideas and you don't know which characters are worth investing resources in, I'll give some recommendations. I would say start by building one good team with some slottable characters on the side, and don't spread yourself too thin. This will help you with going through the story and the level up process. Then once you're ready for the endgame content in Forgotten Hall and Pure Fiction, build a second team. And of course later on, that's not going to be an issue anymore, you're going to have multiple teams, but I'm talking about the first phase in the endgame. Now usually the standard team format is you have a main DPS, a sustain character, and the 2 other slots could be some buffers, debuffers, or even some flex DPS, or a combination of any of these basically. Now as I mentioned earlier, build whatever characters you really fancy, but if you want some universal recommendations for the free characters, I would say go with these particular ones. For main DPS, I would say Dr. Ratio is a great DPS. He's a feature 5-star character, so you can't go wrong with that one. Followed by QQ, especially if you have her at E4 and above. I somehow have her at E6, actually, I don't know how. I got super lucky, I guess. When it comes to sustain, I would say Lynx is great, but we do get her later, so you'd have to build Natasha at the beginning, but I would replace Natasha with Lynx as soon as possible. Fire Trailblazer is also a very decent early unit. It will help you with sustain as well, but it can also do some decent damage. It will help with sustain, especially if Natasha can't just solo sustain your team. And leveling up the Trailblazer is not really a waste because the levels on the character do persist even when you switch paths for the Trailblazer. However, the traces are per path, so definitely keep that in mind. Asta is also a great buffer, so I would definitely build her, and she gets better with more Eidolons. Herda is also a great option, funnily enough, both early and late. She's one of the best characters in Pure Fiction, so building her is a good investment into the future. She's not only good in pure fiction actually, she can be good in both simulated universe and in MOC. The rest of the free characters are okay and could be built in different situations, but I would call them a bit more niche, so they're not universal. But they do have their places and I'll mention them whenever they come up. Now let's talk more about the gacha. This is the most variable part, of course, and it will heavily depend on what you'll get. I'll link you Pridwen, which is an awesome site for building characters, but I'll give you some personal new player recommendations. First, let's just get the universal units out of the way. These are usable in almost every team and you can't go wrong with them. When it comes to supports, for 5-star standard characters, we have Bronya. She's an amazing character, usable with all free-to-play DPSs. The only team she doesn't work on is DOT team, which is a very premium team. For 4 stars, we have Tinyun and we have Pella. These two are amazing 4-star characters. You can't go wrong with building them if you get them. To a lesser extent, we have Gunaifen, Asta, and Hanya. And I would add Well to this category because he's both a DPS and a debuffer, so he can flex between those two roles just fine. And then when it comes to sustains, at lower Eidolons, I would say Lynx and Gepard are kinda comparable, so go with whatever you want, or whoever you get earlier pretty much. Since Gallagher got released recently, I would tack in Gallagher in that category as well of Lynx and Gepard. In some cases, he's even better than them when it comes to synergy with some of the newer DPSs. Then we have Bailu, and then finally Natasha. You're gonna need a sustain character, so at least one of these for your first team is needed. If you're using Natasha, I would say Fire Trailblazer is a decent unit to have in the team as well if you're struggling with sustain. Now this is gonna be a very fun section. I'm gonna give some team ideas for all the DPS characters that you might have early on, but granted, this is gonna focus more on the free characters that you get. If you do have some of the featured 5 stars especially, definitely build those over whatever you're gonna get at the start. So an example, Aventurine is an awesome character to build at the beginning, one of the best sustains you're gonna build. So of course you would build that over Gepard or Natasha or Lynx. Now that we got the disclaimer out of the way, let's start with giving some recommendations. So starting with Doctor Ratio. I would run Doctor Ratio with 2 supports and 1 healer, the standard comp basically. The best 4-star supports for Doctor Ratio I would say Gunaifen, Pella, and Tinyun. And if you happen to have Bronya or Welt, those will also function really well. When it comes to sustain, just put whatever sustain you have. But I'll give the edge to Gallagher if you have him, due to the synergy. I'll say this for the last time, but if you have Natasha, you can throw in Fire Trailblazer if you can't survive. Now let's talk about Yanqing. Unfortunately, Yanqing's kit relies on him not to be hit, so you really want a shielder with him. And the only shielders we have early on in the game are Gepard and kinda the Fire Trailblazer, which is the budget version. If you have Gepard, then you're set, and then you can run him with Gepard and 2 supports. Any universal supports could work here, so your Tinyuns, your Pella, anything could work really. Don't sleep on Gunaifen as well, she's pretty good. She's not only restricted to dot teams pretty much. Then if you don't have Gepard, I would say run him with Fire Trailblazer, another sustain, and another support. Now to my favorite standard banner DPS, Clara, or Svarog, I guess. He's the one doing the fighting. Clara is very budget friendly in my opinion because you can run Marsh with her, you can run Lynx with her. And the reason why they work really well with Clara because they increase the aggro on Clara and her kit works when she's getting hit, so those are perfect for her. You can run, of course, both Marsh and Lynx if you're struggling with sustain. I would run only Lynx with her at some point later on. In the other 2 slots, you can run some of the supports like Pella, Tinyun, Gunaifen, Bronya. Kind of, she doesn't really work great with her, but she can definitely work. And you can even slot in another DPS because Clara doesn't use her skill that often. She can be the tank of your team in a way. Now Welt is a weird one as I said earlier. Welt can be used as a DPS or a buffer DPS combo. If you have Doctor Ratio, he pairs very well with him, and then you can slot in a healer and another support. He doesn't have any particular synergies, so he's very flexible in that sense, so you can run anyone with him. Now moving on to Himiko. A fun teammate for Himiko, but not really required, is Herda. They're very fun to use together, so I would recommend it, but it's definitely not required. She doesn't have any particular synergies, so you can run the standard 1 sustain and 2 supports. She could work with any of the universal supports we mentioned earlier, same with the sustains. Now when it comes to the 4 stars that I would really recommend, we have QQ. I would run QQ with a sustain and 2 supports. QQ at E4 and above is really busted, so I would highly recommend her. Some honorable mentions for some other 4-star DPS characters that you can use. I would say Sorval is a decent option. She doesn't have any specific synergies, so you can run a standard team with her. She's pretty decent in content where you have a lot of enemies, but I would say any of the other options we mentioned before would be better. Now this was an exhaustive but also kind of short summary of some of the fun teams that you can build early on in the game. Of course, it doesn't cover all of the permutations that you might have on your account. So again, I recommend checking Pridwin. It has a detailed descriptions on which characters are great and how to build those characters. So I highly recommend it. But yeah, I hope the recommendations that I gave would help you out, and let me know if you like them in the comment section. Now let's talk about the domains to farm. Domains get activated, as I mentioned earlier, as you go through the story. So at a certain point, you're not gonna have all of them available. So I'll try to give an idea on which ones are good in each part of the story, and then you make your own decision, of course. It does depend on the needs of your team, of course, but these are universal recommendations for which domains are the best to farm in general for your account. I would say early on, the best domain to farm is the Musketeer and the Healer set domain. So you get a good generic set for your DPSs and a decent set for your healers. I would swap out 2 pieces for something else for the healer set later on, of course. Once you have the 3rd region unlocked and kind of finished, you do get the HP and speed sets domain. That one is really good. It gives you 2 sets that you kind of want to farm. The speed set is really good, both as a 2-piece and as a 4-piece, and the HP set is really good as a 2-piece. We do also have the dot and the follow-up sets domain, but that one gets unlocked by doing one of the side main stories, or at least the first part of it. And this domain is pretty decent if you're trying to farm some follow-up 2-pieces or some attack 2-pieces, or if you're trying to farm for some of your dot characters. This one is one of my favorites because I do have a dot team, but I would say the speed and HP set is the best one to farm. Even if you unlock the latest region, I would say still farm the HP and speed sets. Those are the most fuel efficient in my opinion, but of course it depends on your needs. Now when it comes to Simulated Universe, I would say World 3 is the best one early on. It has Space Sealing Station, which is really good for your DPSs, and it has Fleet of the Ageless, which is really good on your supports. I would skip World 5 and World 4. World 6 is okay if you have a defense scaling character, and that way you can farm for your follow-up attackers and for your defense characters. And then once you unlock World 7 and 8, I think those are also really good. I would say World 8 is the best one, but World 7 is really good as well. World 8 has a really good DPS set and a really good support set. The DPS set is best in slot for a lot of DPS characters, and the support set is also best in slot for a lot of characters, albeit a bit harder to achieve. And when it comes to World 7, it has a really universal support set in Broken Keel, and a very decent DPS set that is a bit more niche. We recently also got World 9, which contains 2 DPS sets that are pretty good. The Sigonia set is really good for pure fiction in general, especially on erudition characters like Herda and Himiko. And the Izumo set is really good on Acheron, but you can also be creative and make it work on other characters. A quick example of that is if you run Herda and Himiko on the same team, both of them can leverage that set. This world in general, I would say, is in the middle of the pack. So if I have to rank all of them in a vacuum, after you unlock all of them, I would say World 8, then World 7, then World 3. And of course later on, once you unlock the synthesizer, where you can repurpose some of your 5-star relics, you can then craft whatever set you want. That's why I usually recommend the domains where you can get multiple pieces at the same time, from sets that you can actually use, rather than one set that you can use and a set that you don't use. Now a quick tip, I would recommend getting some high-level friends to help with faster farming, both for domains and calyxes. And related to relic farming, I would give precedence to characters' traces, especially the passives, before relics farming. Especially if you don't have relic farming or relics level 5. I would say early on just slap whatever relics you have that have the best stats on them and don't worry about it too much. Especially if you don't have the level 5 relics yet. Now for some miscellaneous tips, the first thing that I'm gonna mention is don't spend your premium currency, aka your jades, on standard banner. I would say it's absolutely a waste. You'll get passes for the standard banner as you play the game. Just use those instead on the standard banner. Keep your premium currency for the featured banner. And when it comes to paying for this game, I highly encourage not buying the bundles. Those are very overpriced. If you can afford it, of course, go for it, but I don't think it's worth it. Spend responsibly. The only thing that I kinda recommend is the $5 monthly thing. That's your best bang for buck, if you will. The battle pass is also okay, especially early on. It gives you a bunch of resources and a decent light cone of your choosing. So that's also a consideration if you have the funds for it. And again, spend responsibly. But yeah, this is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed. There are a lot of other things that I could have talked about here. Things like simulated universe and which paths to use, for example, or things like light cones and which ones are the best free-to-play options and all of that jazz. But that goes into too much detail for this video. Hey, maybe in a future video, you never know. If you do want that, please let me know in the comments as usual. But I think I already rambled enough. So yeah, just let me know if I missed anything in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!